Hello and welcome to No Culty Vibes. In this video, I am going to be talking about 8 passengers, specifically Ruby Franke and Kevin Franke, and the culty connections that they've had for the last several years. Because shockingly, there's more than one, there's more than two. And I want to just talk about how we got to this place. If you don't know, Ruby Franke was recently arrested for aggravated child abuse. So this video is going to have some heavy topics. Child abuse is going to be mentioned a couple of times. So please, first and foremost, take care if you're sensitive to any of those subjects. I am obviously going to be talking about cults and the harm that cults inflict on everyone as well. So please take care, skip this video if those are difficult topics for you, and watch some of the other lighter topics on my channel, maybe about celebrities. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Cassie Marie. I'm an ex cult hopper. I was part of a couple of different cults before I deconstructed and moved on. And as I was deconstructing, I started making content about all the things that I was learning about cults and all the research I was doing. And now I share content about different cults and what cult experts have to say about the psychology behind it. And I try to also share things that we can do to help heal and recover from cults and how we can approach them and better talk about them as people. So if you're interested in that, please like and subscribe, and you can follow me on TikTok as well. I'm at the.CassieMarie on TikTok. But in this video, we're going to be talking about 8 passengers and Ruby Franke and why they're super culty. And I think it's important while this story is going viral and it is so difficult and so horrific, I hope that we can educate a little bit on cult dynamics and why it's important to keep an eye out for these things and how bad it can get when we don't pay attention and we don't realize what's going on. So, 8 passengers deep dive and the many cults behind the horrific story. Also, if you hear some background noise, I've just got a lot of people at home playing outside for Labor Day. I hope you guys are having a great Labor Day weekend, but that's what's going on. So, Kevin and Ruby Franke are the parents behind the 8 Passengers YouTube channel that has been under controversy pretty much since it started, but heavily so since back in 2020. Ruby is 41 and Kevin, I believe, is 44, and they are parents to 6 children. And I will also say that I've done a lot of research, I've done a lot of work to put this together, and I have followed this family from a distance for a while because of these controversies, but there's a lot of misinformation about the family and the situation floating around the internet. So if I get things wrong, please let me know in the comments. I will absolutely correct them. And there are tons of YouTube followers that have been following this channel and this family for many, many years. Jordan and McKay are ones that I really like, that I've watched some of their videos, so I highly recommend going and watching them as well. They have really great information and have done a lot of research. So the first cult that we're going to talk about is the Mormon Church, the LDS Church. Kevin and Ruby have been members since before they started their YouTube channel. Kevin was an associate professor at BYU for a long time. He is not anymore, but we will talk about that later. And Ruby's just been a stay-at-home mom, they've been a normal run-of-the-mill Mormon family, or supposedly so, until a lot of this stuff came out. And like I said, they're best known for their YouTube channel, 8 Passengers, and all of the controversies that are behind it. So they started their YouTube channel back in 2015 and it grew really quickly. I think it had over 100,000 subscribers in the first year that they started it. And then they went from like 100,000 to 1 million in the next year. And then by the time the channel was taken down, which I think happened just last month, but it was definitely in 2023, they had amassed over 2.3, I think like 2.36 million followers. They were really big in the family vlogging and Mormon mommy blogging, Mormon mommy vlogging area of YouTube. They mostly filmed their kids and some really controversial, inappropriate things of their kids. And I think that's partly why they grew so quickly and had so much fame. So every time I talk about the Mormon Church being culty or a cult, I usually get a lot of backlash or people arguing that they are not. They definitely are. They actively harm people in the LGBTQIA plus community. It is not enough space for them. There's been a lot of controversy with that. They cover up for people that harm children. They rip apart families. Similar to Scientology, they don't call it disconnection or have a disconnection policy, but the Mormon Church is notorious for recommending, if you will, suggesting that people disconnect from their families who are not Mormon or who are maybe raising concerns about their Mormon faith. I'm going to show you a byte model comparison of the Mormon Church to cult-like techniques. If you don't know, Stephen Hassan is a psychologist. He has a PhD and he was a former cult member. He was in the Moonies for a long time until he was deprogrammed by his parents. And he has studied cults and cult psychology as a former cult member. And he developed something called the byte model to help explain undue influence and coercive control, which is the means in which cults operate from a psychological perspective. So I'm going to go through that and show some of the things that are concerning about the Mormon Church. And then the biggest issue with 8 passengers is when you amass 2.36 million followers, you're making a lot of money in ad revenue. And they said that they regularly attended temple. They were part of the church, and the Mormon Church requires 10% tithe, which is very culty. So everyone that was watching them before their channel got taken down, they were contributing to this family, giving money to the Mormon Church that is horribly controversial and, like I said, harms a lot of people and a lot of families. So that in itself would warrant covering this family and the cultiness behind Ruby and Kevin. But unfortunately, this is literally cult number 1 and just the beginning of some really serious and scary accusations. So you can see here the byte model stands for behavior control, information control, and then I'll skip ahead for a second, thought control and emotional control. And you can see, I can't remember who did this. This is on Stephen Hassan's website, Freedom of Mind. If you Google Mormonism and the byte model, you can find these and read a little bit more about it. And you can read about the ex-Mormon who highlighted this, but he highlighted yellow where he feels like the Mormon Church kind of does this method of control. Red, he definitely knows the Mormon Church does this method of control and has seen it himself personally or someone close to him. He put green because for things he doesn't feel like the Mormon Church does. So you can see that most of this is red and that, however you feel about the word cult, the Mormon Church is extremely culty and problematic and harmful and uses many, many, many of these forms of control over its members. The emotional control is a little hard to read here, which is why I want you to go look at it. But we don't need to go through every single one of these or this video would be crazy. I just wanted to show you that there are going to be a lot of elements of Mormonism when we're talking about these people. And this is why I say it falls on the harmful end of that cult spectrum. The second thing that I find really culty about this family is that Mormon mommy bloggers and Mormon vloggers and Mormon mom talk is a huge cultural phenomenon that has a lot of cult-like elements to it, mostly because Mormonism is culty and family vlogging and blogging is culty as well. One of the things, we're talking child exploitation and adultification of children, and there's a huge lack of protection and support for child influencers, similar to child reality stars. And we've seen a lot of child reality stars, especially the Duggars lately, with Ginger Duggar's memoir that she released and the documentary Shiny Happy People. Reality star children have a lot of similarities as they grow up and leave their family environment that children who were raised in cults have as they grow up and leave their environment. So, Mormon mommy bloggers or vloggers tend to have large families and they're encouraged to not work outside the home. Mormon families specifically, they tend to gravitate towards making money online because they live in such a patriarchal structure and a patriarchal belief system. So the dad works and supports the family. They're encouraged to have a big family. Your highest calling on this earth is to have kids and have a good family. And the mom always falls into the caretaking role of maintaining the house, taking care of the children, and often homeschooling the children as well, like we see in a lot of other evangelical cult like environments. And like I mentioned, shiny, happy people, things like that. Which is why I put in here, it's definitely not limited to Mormonism. There is kind of an epidemic of evangelicals doing some type of blogging, vlogging, TikTok, influencer type things as well. But it just really lends to this because they don't see it as work, even though they're often working so many more hours doing this than if they just had a job. But they feel like they're sharing their faith, they're sharing the gospel, they're evangelizing towards the lifestyle that they think people should have. People should be saved, eternal salvation, all the things. Can't talk today. Um, and then another really interesting culty element of this like family vlogging, family influencing thing is celebrities and cults have a really interesting relationship. I talk a lot about pop culture on my TikTok. I'm bringing a lot of that content over here as well. So I'm sure you'll see it if you like and subscribe and stick around. But cults love celebrities and celebrities love cults. It's a great way for cults to get money, right? So when we're talking about the Mormon Church, 10% tithe is required and they get their funds. So they highly encourage things like blogging and YouTube and TikTok and brand sponsorships and things like that. They love the money, but they also love the exposure and the notoriety. The Mormon Church and lots of evangelical cults love that they have people online promoting this like happy, healthy, positive lifestyle. And they hope that that will attract more people to their church, their faith, or their specific cult because it looks so perfect. Again, I think of Shiny Happy People and the IBLP and Bill Gothard and how they were made to present like this toxically positive lifestyle that by following these rules and everything, everything's great, everything's perfect, everyone loves us. So there are just a lot of things that help make this go hand in hand and attract Mormons specifically to blogging and vlogging. I also found out while researching this, I thought this was really interesting. Mormon women in particular are taught from a young age to like journal their lives and to keep account of their lives. I guess that Mormons are really big on genealogy and passing down wisdom and knowledge through generations. And they apparently like to document how to have a happy, healthy Mormon life as well. So I apparently from a young age, Mormon girls specifically are taught to document like housekeeping and being a good woman and a good wife and things like that. And I thought that was really wild. So it's almost like they were made to do the blogging and the vlogging. But then there's a lot of harm that comes with children influencers in general, not just these family vlogs or TikToks, but any child influencers that are made to be on camera all the time. They garner a lot of views and their parents are essentially exploiting them. Children become breadwinners and are essentially adultified from a very young age. And I have been watching a YouTube series by Allison Stoner. They created a series and podcast called Dear Hollywood, where they're kind of talking about the issues of being a child actor in Hollywood right now. And I see a lot of similarities between that and cults. And then you add on top of that, child actors don't have a whole lot of protection. And Allison says they were thrown into an industry created for adults and not created for children in any way. And influencers and reality TV stars are very similar. But child actors have some protection as far as like financial protection or funds, though the adults in their life don't always follow those laws and there are legal ways around it. So child actors get exploited as well. I don't want to say that influencers are better or worse than actors. But there's like no laws in place yet. There are some coming, and I'll talk about that in a second. Um, but it can be really jarring, and you can have a hard time developing a sense of self and knowing who you are and how to express that when you've been made to be an adult as a child. I highly encourage you to look more into that. If I did this whole thing would just be about child influencers. So this is kind of a brief overview. But Illinois was the first state to actually pass a law recently protecting child influencers. And this happened just last month in August of 2023. Oh, yeah. And then this last part is similarly. Ooh, I'm still figuring out how to do some of this live streaming stuff. But similarly to reality stars and child actors, being a child influencer can make it really difficult to make friends. It can be really isolating when you're a child made to work all the time. And a lot of times they're homeschooled and they don't have school to make friends. But a lot of your friends like don't understand what your home life is like. They don't understand why you or your parents get recognized when you go out. It can be hard to like have friends over, go out and do things with friends when people are always coming up to you. And cults look for every way to isolate their members. So, creating that environment of isolation is creating a cult like environment for these kids. And then, what I think is the most horrific thing about child influencers and even child reality stars to an extent is predators have really easy access to a child's likeness. They can form parasocial relationships with children, and this can put the child in danger in so many ways, including to their likeness being used for CSAM and distributing CSAM. Allison Stoner that I mentioned earlier tells a story about that. Actually, the first time they saw themselves and their face, I'll try not to get you too mad at me for saying it this way, but seeing their face on inappropriate material that they never shot themselves, but their face and their likeness was used for materials that are illegal. And that is that's horrible and very traumatic for a child to be exposed to, even as like a teen or an adult after they grow up and leave the industry. And this danger, this real and apparent danger that whatever these children are in is often ignored by parents and fans in the name of money and fame and notoriety, and these children being the breadwinners for their family. And I find that extremely culty because we know cults often protect child abusers and often deny harm to their members for whatever reason, but that's another thing that's just super culty. And then I think it's also just rude to share private or potentially embarrassing things that children go through without their consent. We're seeing reality stars start to come forward and talk about how traumatizing it was to be on camera. And now that a lot of these early influencers, child influencers that are growing up, are saying the same thing. They're echoing how embarrassing it was to share certain shopping trips or specific meltdowns or fights with siblings that are being seen by thousands or millions of people without their consent. That is a form of coercive control. Lack of informed consent is abusive and controlling to a child, and a child cannot consent to this. So it's just, I think there are so many parallels to cults, and to think that these children in the Frankie family were in the Mormon cult already, and then they were exposed to this cult of being on YouTube in front of millions of people for years and years and years has to be horribly traumatizing. Luckily or unluckily, depending on how you look at this, because this is just really the tiniest little thing that someone can do, and and it's just a start, but hopefully this will lead to other protections. But Illinois became the first state to pass a law protecting child influencers. And states like Washington, California, and Pennsylvania have similar laws in the works. They're just going through the judicial process. But according to a website I found talking about this, starting July 1st, 2024, parents in Illinois will be required to put aside 50% of earnings for a piece of content into a blocked trust fund for the child, which is so important, based on the percentage of time that they're featured in the video. For example, if a child is in 50% of a video, they should receive 25% of the funds. If they're in 100%, they're required to get 50% of the earnings. However, this only applies to scenarios during which the child appears on the screen more than 30% of the vlogs over a 12-month period. So this really is for children who are the main subject of the vlogs or the influencing or whatever. And it's a good start, but it doesn't address the lack of consent, right? It doesn't address what parents are allowed to share versus what they're not allowed to share and other protections that should be in place for these kids. But then again, if you think about it, reality stars still don't have a lot of those protections, and neither do child actors. There's a lot that needs to happen from a media and entertainment standpoint for there to be a safe environment for children to be in entertainment at all. So back to the Frankie family and the timeline and the YouTube channel. They had controversial videos from the start, but followers started to notice around 2020 that Ruby Franke in particular seemed to be extremely strict, extremely authoritative, and some people started accusing her of child abuse. So in 2020, their oldest son, some places say they got in a fight with his little brother. Some say he pulled a prank on his little brother. And either way, I'm sure a prank probably led to a fight. And the oldest son's room was taken away, and he was made to sleep on a beanbag for what Ruby Franke admitted was 7 months. 7 months. He did not have a bed, did not have a room, did not have any privacy, did not have any autonomy. And this lit a fire under a lot of people who have spoken out against family vlog channels and who have had concerns with the Frankies in general. But a Child Protective Services investigation was started because of this, because so many people began reporting them and talking about them and posting Reddit about them. There was just a lot going on where people were like, something, if she's showing this and saying this, something is not right here. And then I think this was in 2022, if not, or yes, it would have been late 2021, early 2022. Their youngest daughter was 6 years old, and she was made to pack her own lunch for school. And she forgot one day, and Ruby came on a video and said that her daughter, she was not going to bring her daughter a lunch because she forgot to pack it. She said these were natural consequences for her, and that she hoped none of the teachers or anybody at school fed her while she was there, because as a 6-year-old, she should learn to pack her own lunch. This in particular went viral on TikTok because she said, it was like the way that she said it and presented it. I think it's horrible and abusive anyway, but the way that she said it was very much along the lines of, I want my daughter to starve. And by the way, I meant to say this at the beginning, but I'll say it now. I am purposely not using the names of the children. They have 2 adult children that I will name their oldest daughter later because she plays a role in this story. But the minor children, I will not be using their names on purpose. And you probably noticed in the first slide, I blurred all their faces out because I don't feel right and comfortable perpetuating and sharing the pictures of minors. So she was under fire twice for pretty serious allegations. But then people started going through their old videos. They started digging up everything that had even the slightest bit of concern. And somebody found a video back in 2019 when viewers noticed that their oldest son had been out of the vlogs for a while, and they were wondering what happened to him, if he was okay, where he went. And of course, people were discovering this later, but they were just really concerned about what might have happened to him in that time span. And Ruby Franke and I believe Kevin Franke, the dad, and the son were on camera being filmed one time talking about the fact that the oldest son was sent away to a wilderness camp to work on behavioral issues. The mom said he needed to learn some maturity and he was being particularly defiant, and they wanted him to learn a lesson and get better. And this is where cult number 3 comes in, because the troubled teen industry is also incredibly harmful and abusive and cult-like. I found on this website with an article titled 5 Facts About the Troubled Teen Industry. The troubled teen industry is a network of private youth programs, therapeutic boarding schools, residential treatment centers, religious academies, and wilderness programs, and drug rehabilitation centers. And it dates back at least 50 years. The facilities are operated by private companies, nonprofits, or faith-based groups, and they promise to help youth with problems related to behavior, addiction, and eating disorders, and in some cases, sexual orientation and gender identity. So that is your pray the gay away camps and places that think that that is a choice and that children should not be in the LGBTQIA plus community. Despite numerous allegations of serious abuse that date back decades, nearly all of these are still in operation and they are largely unregulated. So Scientology actually has a similar camp like this called The Ranch. Leah Remini's Scientology in the Aftermath has an episode on this, but it's very, very reminiscent of the troubled teen industry. There are a lot of troubled teen industry facilities and camps that were started by Synanon, which was a therapy cult. And there are a lot of religious troubled teen industry camps. Mormonism has them. The IBLP and Bill Gothard, I've heard stories that there are troubled teen industry camps inspired by him as well, or associated with that organization. And I know that a lot of evangelical cults have things similar to this as well. They are extremely deceptive and cult-like. They market themselves as a way to rehabilitate troubled teens or children, but they use methods of undue influence and coercive control. They often kidnap kids against their will, and they abuse them so severely that it leads to long-term issues and effects like PTSD. According to an article that The Guardian titled "The Wilderness Therapy That Teens Say Feels Like Abuse," the particular camp that the Frankie family sent their oldest son to involved a lot of hard labor and excessive physical exertion and hikes. They allegedly didn't feed them very much. They would give them like cans of tuna for protein, and they dealt with like a lot of sleep preservation, just a lot of work, a lot of physical work, a lot of kind of systematically training the children and teens to not be defiant and not express themselves and not oppose anything that an authority figure said to them. They are usually trained to be obedient at any and all costs. And sometimes there are some severe medical issues that people report because of these as well. I believe this article included someone from the specific camp that the oldest son went to. I couldn't find confirmation of it, but from what I could tell, it was the same camp, and there are many others like it. They talked to a couple. They talked to a couple other teens from other camps that were very similar. So another culty thing about the troubled teen industry is because these camps are so unregulated, whenever assault occurs, it's not reported, it's covered up, and the children and teens are often made to feel like it was their fault, like they did something wrong to have that happen to them. It's a breeding ground for predators. Predators will get away with anything here, and it's just extremely resembles cults and cult-like behavior. Paris Hilton was actually sent to like a rehabilitation center in the troubled teen industry, and she speaks out about it a lot and advocates for regulation and change. She has done some amazing things to help, and she's donated and she's spoken out about it, and it's really amazing. And then I have a TikTok friend at Stevia Plath. I have her handle down at the bottom here. Stevia_Plath, sorry. She has a lot of content on her page as a survivor of the troubled teen industry. So I definitely recommend that you look into this. And I will be doing more videos on the troubled teen industry in particular, outside of the 8 passengers Ruby Franke situation. Anyway, I gave you a preview of the next slide, but in case you thought 3 cult-like systems was enough, apparently it's not for the Frankie family, because Ruby, at some point into her YouTube journey, joined a self-help group called Connections, run by a woman named Jodi Hildebrandt. And after they started receiving a lot of backlash about the child abuse allegations in their videos, Ruby announced that she would no longer be doing the 8 Passengers YouTube channel and that she was going to step away to be more involved with Connections. And if you Google this online, you will see that there were so many culty red flags for Connections. And again, people were speaking out and advocating for the kids and for this family for a really long time. So Connections was founded by Jodi Hildebrandt as an advice and personal development company. The website says it's for people wanting to create joy in their life and relationship, which sounds so life coachy. Jodi really was marketing herself as a life coach. And on the website, it also said Connections is a different modality of healing than that psychotherapy cannot offer you. So already it's positioning itself as something unique, something special, something that you can't get just anywhere. And even more than that, something that's going to be better for you than anything else you could be part of or you could try. Jodi apparently is also a therapist, and she had her license suspended at one time for discussing private client issues and conversations with leaders of the Mormon Church at BYU. So she has a tumultuous history with her therapy license as well, but she didn't really need a therapy license to start a life coaching cult. Some of the accusations of this cult are that Jodi and Ruby Franke, began a YouTube channel called Moms of Truth, where they started sharing parenting advice based on these connections principles. Kevin and Ruby filmed a video for Connections in which they admitted to pulling their 10-year-old son and 8-year-old daughter out of school and making them clean floors all day and giving them no Christmas presents as punishment because Ruby said that they were acting selfish. So after they joined Connections, their content kind of escalated. And again, online, people have been following this whole time and expressing that things seem to be escalating and the red flags seem to be getting worse. Jodi allegedly shared, oh, I shared this already. She allegedly said that this was like the only way to create the life that you desire. Jodi and Ruby also encourage cutting off family members if they don't agree with your ideals. So disconnection and isolation and cutting off community. And they taught parents that their children are evil and manipulative, and said that a parent has no obligation to love, support, nurture, or care for their child at all, and that it is their sole duty to teach them about Jesus and save them by any means. This makes me think of Scientology. If you don't know much about Scientology, they think of children as adults in young bodies, as mature souls, just the same as an adult in young bodies. And I actually watched a video that Jenna Miscavige did. Aaron Smith Levin has a YouTube channel called Growing Up in Scientology, and he brought on Jenna Miscavige, who was the leader of Scientology, David Miscavige's niece, who wrote a memoir when she left Scientology about all the abuses that she witnessed and what she had been through. And she talked about how people in Scientology, when she was having some hard times with her parents and issues with her family, they told her that family is not important on this planet, that you're just an adult soul in a young body, and those connections aren't as important as clearing the planet, saving the planet, etc. Their whole afterlife, eternal life thing differs greatly from Christianity and Mormonism, but it's the same idea that nobody on this nobody in reality, nobody on earth is as important as your eternal life or what happens after. The Moms of Truth YouTube channel also made extreme and problematic sexist, homophobic, racist, and transphobic and ableist statements on every occasion. So they pretty much hit every horrible thing you possibly could. And this is, again, just a light overview of all of these things. Like I said, the YouTubers Jordan and McKay have a lot of videos on these people. They've been covering this for a long time as ex-Mormons, and they have a lot more to say on why this was terrible, why this was problematic. And I highly recommend that you go watch them. So earlier I was talking about how a lot of these child stars, child influencers are speaking out now that they've grown up. And the Frankie family is no different. Sherry Frankie is the oldest daughter of 8 passengers. And she started going to BYU a couple of years ago. And in April of 2023, she went on a podcast sharing her story of being on this YouTube family and being part of Connections. And when Sherry started speaking out about her experience, we saw so many more culty red flags of Jody and Connections than we had seen before. And I found parts of this interview really interesting. If you are an ex-Mormon or ex-evangelical, ex-Christian in any way, this podcast might be a little triggering because she was interviewed by current Mormons. So it's very Jesus heavy, very Mormon heavy. They use a lot of Mormon language and they have some ideas that I don't totally agree with. So just take care if you want to go listen to this episode. But I do think it's really informative from the perspective of Sherry sharing her experience with her mom as a part of Connections. She said that they joined Connections when she was 15 years old in 10th grade. And she mentioned that in the beginning, she saw this as a positive thing. And we can look at it from the cult lens, seeing this as a huge red flag. But she said that they learned a new lingo, and other people would be confused when they would interact with her family and talk to them. And she says it made her feel really close to her family because it felt like they were sharing something special and important. And I think that highlights the benefits, not the benefits of a cult, but like why people think they're benefiting from a cult. Nobody joins a cult. They join something that they think is a good thing and they think they're benefiting from. So her talking about how she felt like that was a positive thing was fascinating to me. But we know if you are interested in cults and language, there's a great book called Cultish by Amanda Montell, where she talks about how cults and fans, like fanatical people of different groups and different subjects, use language in very specific ways. And that lingo is used to create an us versus them mentality. And it's used to, again, make you feel close and bonded to the group or the cult, or in this case, Sherry's family. But that lingo that she was using is often loaded language and thought-stopping cliches. Loaded language is something that means something only to the group itself and not outsiders. And then thought-stopping cliches are phrases that people will repeat over and over to stop critical thinking. And we do this in thought-stopping cliches happens in regular society as well, but they're especially used in cults. A good example of this is when you leave a cult, a lot of times members that are still in will say, when you criticize the cult or talk about the harm or talk about the issues you faced, they might say something like, well, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And they'll say that to you as a way to just not think critically about the harm, but to say, oh yeah, lots of things are harmful, but that doesn't mean you can't believe in them. And we know it's much more complicated, much more nuanced than that. Of course, cults have good things about them. Otherwise, nobody would be in them. Sherry felt, though, that connections got really bad when they began equating their self help curriculum, their life coaching curriculum, with Mormon Church teachings. She said that the leader of Connections, which we know to be Jody, would really equate this to the gospel. And she would start saying, this is what God wants you to do or what God wants you to think, and things like that. She said that she was particularly harmed one time early on when someone said that Sherry didn't have enough empathy for other people, and that was kind of her fatal flaw. And she had to constantly try to fix it. And no matter what she would do, they would still tell her that she didn't have enough empathy and needed to rewire her brain and change the way that she was thinking about things to be nicer, to be more empathetic, and, we know outside of cults and things like that, to probably be more obedient and compliant. But this could also just be a way to break down your self-esteem and make you question yourself, which is something that's very common in cults as well. Sherry talks about how she was able to wake up and deconstruct when she went to BYU and she was finally separated from her family and had other people to talk to, other people to interact with. And she still is very, very Mormon. And still, like I said, listening to this podcast episode was a little bit difficult. She still seems like she has a lot to unpack and deconstruct from a control perspective and from an unhealthy perspective. But it reminded me a lot of Ginger Duggar's book, the way that she talked about it, where she could see how these things were more overtly and obviously harmful and controlling. Whereas, I think when you deconstruct out of something so horrifically harmful into something that's a little bit less harmful on the spectrum, maybe it can feel like a whole new world. It can feel like something super positive, but it's often just the same stuff repackaged. It just might take a little more or take a little longer or be a little more under the surface as far as it's harmful. And Ginger Duggar did the same thing. She left the IBLP and Bill Gothard, but is still part of John MacArthur's church and is still very evangelical, which still harms a lot of people. She just happens to be very privileged in that environment to be maybe less harmed than others. Sherry also talked about how she couldn't tell her parents she was doubting Connections teachings and that she was learning these new things because she was afraid that they would disconnect with her. She was afraid, she didn't use that word specifically, but she said she was afraid she wouldn't be included in things and wouldn't be invited to things and just wouldn't be part of this family and this in group anymore. And for her siblings' sake and for a lot of reasons, she didn't want to do that. But she said eventually she decided to cut off contact with her family, but it was able to happen slowly over time. There were a lot of things happening in her family at that time. I'm sorry about this crazy lighting, guys. I didn't realize that the sun was going to be like this at this hour. I don't usually record at this hour. But she said that it happened slowly over time as some other issues came up in her family, and she didn't share much more than that. So it would be interesting to know what was going on at that time. But she talked a little bit about her healing journey coming out of something so high control and that she's having to learn to trust herself as she heals. And she has also been trying new things and exploring new hobbies and passions that she wasn't allowed to have before as part of this life coaching personal development group. And that is something that we can all relate to. I'm sure, like, even Ginger Duggar really relates to having to go through this process of learning to trust yourself again and love yourself again and know that you're not crazy and you're not doing everything wrong and you're not a bad person, and that this group was awful and controlling. I believe she also mentioned, I listened to the podcast and I don't know if she said this specifically or if she just alluded to the fact that she has gotten some real therapy after this, which has helped with her healing and deconstruction process as well. And you guys know, if you've followed me for any length of time, that I am all about the life after cults, life after deconstruction, what it's like to go on that healing journey. So I'm happy that Sherry has been able to experience that in a way that works for her. So all of this, all of these different cults, all of these different red flags that people were trying to warn about for so long, people called CPS on them. led to Ruby and Jody being arrested on August 30th and for aggravated child abuse. I'm not going to go really in depth into what happened with this and what we know about it. I'm going to make a different video about that. And it is just like really, really bad. But one of Jody's minor children seemed to escape. No, I'm sorry. One of Ruby's minor children, one of the Frankie children from 8 Passengers, escaped Jody's house. They were somehow being housed in Jody's house and went to a neighbor's house to ask for food and water. And the neighbor called the police and said that the child appeared to be emaciated and malnourished and had open wounds and duct tape around their extremities. And then another child was found in similar condition in the house. There's a lot to it that, like I said, I will share in a different video, but it is so sad to think that there were so many red flags and there have been so many people trying to speak out about all the harms and abuses of all 4 of these cult-like groups that this family was a part of. And still it's almost like no matter what anyone did, this is still how it ended, and it still had to get this bad for people to take action. And I think that's part of why it's really important to educate these things and make people aware. Even though in this case it did seem like the internet in a lot of ways was trying to rally behind these kids and help, there still were so many more that were giving them views and a lot of money over time that possibly could have been prevented if we, decided to stand together against these things. Something that you might have been asking throughout this whole thing is I mentioned Kevin Frankie in the beginning and maybe once or twice in the middle, but he hasn't been mentioned in a lot of this. And everybody is asking, like, where was the dad for all of this stuff, for all of these cults and all of these things? And there were rumors of separation and divorce swirling since 8 Passengers ended back in 2022, since they stopped making videos. It seemed as though Kevin kind of removed himself from the public eye. He used to have an Instagram with tons and tons of followers. He removed himself. He wasn't posting on Instagram. He removed himself from a lot of things and seemed to kind of disappear. So people were like, are they separated? Are they divorced? What's going on? Apparently he was also fired from BYU sometime early in 2023. We also don't know why that happened or exactly when that happened or like what the circumstances were around that. And then the only thing that he said after the arrests were made, he retained an attorney and they gave a statement to Page 6 this past Thursday, which is a tabloid publication. So I don't know what the strategy would be behind that, but the statement just said his urgent focus is simply to keep his children together under his fatherly care. I have very strong opinions under the like how caring his fatherly care is, considering he was present for all of this and seems to just have left. And if he knew that things were happening that were this bad, I can't imagine why you would leave your children in such a dangerous state. Of course, being under undue influence and coercive control in all of these culty environments makes people do crazy things and believe all kinds of things. So who knows what he believes. However, he kind of disappeared, and I don't know that the kids would be any safer or any better under his care. So what happens now? Where are we with all of this? Like I said, I'm going to make another video with the details of the arrest and what we can expect moving forward and some of the sentiments of the family and statements. But I hope that this means that these kids are put somewhere safe, that they are well taken cared for, that they are loved, that they can be together out of the public eye. Hopefully all of them can grow up and live their lives out of the public eye, outside of all of this mess, and get the help that they need and have the healing that they need, because this is one of the saddest and most horrible cult stories that I've had to cover. It really feels similar and along the lines of Lori Vallow, the Vallow and Chad Daybell case of the mom who coincidentally was also part of a fundamentalist Mormon cult, who her situation, if you don't know, ended so much worse than this one. I'm not even going to mention it. I tried to cover that story when it came out, and it was so bad and so heartbreaking that I couldn't do it, especially considering I tend to cover more of the pop culture media, entertainment industry cults versus some of the more doomsday cults, which this one seems to not have been doomsday-ish, though it came from the Mormon belief system, which does have a lot of similar doomsday-like cults. So that's my deep dive on 8 Passengers. I hope that after watching this, you kind of have a better picture cult-wise of what these 2 adults were a part of, what they put their kids through, and can see how something gets escalated to this point. And like I said, hopefully we're all a little bit more aware, a little bit more educated on cult dynamics and what these red flags look like so we can spot it again. If you liked this video, if you stuck around with me on the live, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. Make sure to like it, subscribe if you haven't already, and there's going to be so much more culty content to come. I'll give it like a second. If anybody has any questions, if anyone's still watching live and you have any questions, I'll give a second to see. But I will also make another video about the arrest in particular, what the circumstances were around that, and hopefully be able to cover that because I have a feeling there will be more to this. There will be a couple of hearings. I don't know if this will go to trial. I'm assuming it will. The charges are pretty serious. And I think we all want to see people held accountable and someone held accountable for what happened to these poor children. Okay. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.